So let's get into today's topic, what it means to be a mindful man. I was first introduced to mindfulness a few years ago. And when I first heard the term mindfulness, I kind of deflected it from my therapist. It sounded a bit woo-woo. It sounded a bit hippie. It didn't sound like something that me as an Aussie bloke wanted to do. The first thing I thought about was doing some meditation. Never done that before. Didn't really want to do it at the time. Also a bit of journaling or gratitude. Again, they didn't really light me up when I thought about them. So it didn't work for me and I put it aside. But then as I progressed through my burnout stage, I started to reflect. And this was helped by my social work degree. And social work has allowed me to put on my critical thinking skills, not only just through the world, but also on my own life as well. And so I've started to look more critically and found texts around mindfulness that actually I gelled in with. And I discovered that it was much more than journaling or practicing gratitude or meditation. And one particular person that I've gone to for that information is Dr. Russ Harris. He's a trainer in acceptance and commitment therapy, which is the modality that I primarily use in my practice at Mindful Men. And I love his work because he makes mindfulness so easy to understand and really practical. So if you've ever read one of his books, you don't need to be a therapist to read his books and understand what they're talking about. There's a lot of theory behind it, but there's also practical things you can do every single day to be more mindful. So what is mindfulness? I'm going to take Dr. Russ Harris's definition first. And this is from his website, actmindfully.com.au. And he says that mindfulness is paying attention with openness, curiosity, flexibility, and kindness. Now, what does that actually mean? And to a lot of us, that might sound a bit woo-woo. And I'd argue that that means that he's paying attention to everything and nothing all at once. If you read his work, he's open to the world, a world of possibilities, both in terms of what's happening in the world, but also how we're feeling as a collective, as a community, but also as individuals as well. He's able to zoom out, but he's also able to zoom back in and focus on what needs attention. Is it a relationship? Is it a value or a lack of value? Is it an emotion? Is it a situation? It's able to pay that attention with openness, be open to all different possibilities and perspectives. It's able to be curious with it, dissect things that need to be dissected, look at different ways of looking at things. This is where the flexibility comes. He's able to be flexible with it. He's not in rigid thinking mode or feeling mode. It's about going where the thoughts go, going where the feelings go and going, okay, maybe this is something new to me, something different. That's something that's not something that I've been brought up to learn or understand. And the last aspect is the kindness, is zooming in and out of that situation with kindness and self-compassion, compassion towards other people, recognizing that our way of being and feeling isn't the only way of being feeling in the world. So I really love this about his perspective. It is quite a diverse way of looking at the world. It's being mindful about the world and the us within the world. Now, on his website is a different particular definition. It's from Jon Kabat-Zinn. Jon is a professor of medicine emeritus and founder of Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction Center and the Center for Mindfulness in Medicine, Healthcare, and Society. And I love Jon's definition of mindfulness because it's the art of conscious living. And I actually use this in my therapy practice. It's conscious living. It's switching off of autopilot, which often so many of us are on. We do the same thing day in, day out, kind of like Groundhog Day. And it's switching off that autopilot and switching on conscious living. It's tuning into how we're feeling, what's going on, how other people are feeling, what they're talking about, how all these things intersect and make us do and behave and feel the way we do. This is the go-to definition for me, and I like it because it's consciousness. And for so much of my life, I've probably been living and doing in the subconscious mindset. But more recently, as I get older and I've done my social work degree and now my therapy practice, I'm consciously tuning into the things that I really want to explore. And a lot of that is my mental health and my well-being. But also as a small business, I'm consciously tuning into what I need to do and what I want to do with the business. But as you can see from these two different definitions, they are very different, but they're also very similar at the same time. And so I wanted to highlight some other different definitions on what it means to be a mindful man. And for those blokes that are in the Mindful Men Facebook community, I'm going to give you a shout out here. What I do every week is for the new members, I welcome them to the group and I ask them the question, what does it mean to be a mindful man? So I've got a few that I'm going to go through today. I'm just going to put them on the spotlight and share what they said, but also share my thoughts about what they said as well. So I'm going to kick off with Bruce. And hi, Bruce, if you're listening, well done for getting into the Mindful Men podcast. And Bruce said that being a mindful man, it's about being present, allowing yourself to be vulnerable and inquisitive and seeking to see through another's eyes. Great definition there, Bruce. And to me, this is looking inwards, but also out. It's recognizing those around us and how we interact with each other. If we were to only consider life through our own eyes, we'd become very self-centered and have rigid thoughts and value sets. But by opening ourselves up to others, it allows us to see the grey, or even not the grey, but the full breadth of colours that are out there. And this helps us to evolve and grow. And some people ask me, Simon, why do you have female guests on the Mindful Men podcast? I'm like, well, so we can get a diverse range of views about the world. It's not just a male's view about the world. There's females, there's kids, there's different kinds of viewpoints, whether they're spiritual or therapeutic or religious or none of those things. Maybe it's just a man's view of the world. What does masculinity mean? And so if we can be present in the moment, which is also about grounding ourselves, be right there in the conversation, but also opening ourselves up to other viewpoints, but also our own viewpoints as well. It's a great way to be mindful. The next one I want to highlight is David. So shout out to David. Well done for getting into the Mindful Men podcast too. David's definition of what it means to be a mindful man is to try and live with integrity, empathy, and self-care in order to aim to be the best version of yourself or be more true to who you are as a person. I particularly like this definition because a lot of the work I do in Mindful Men is around values. And Dr. Russ Harris has a whole bunch of work around values, and that's where I learned it from. And so values sing out for me in David's definition here. He's talking about a way of living, and that way of living is dictated by the behaviors that we have. So behaviors like living with integrity, showing empathy, and engaging in self-care. Values, I believe, are like a compass. And I say this to the guys I work with. We do the values work to have a framework where we can draw from in terms of making decisions, but also reflecting on what's going on. So values can direct us when we're lost, but they can also keep us on track when we're good. They can help us make decisions, and they can also help us weigh up the costs and benefits of making those decisions as well. Some of my values are around wellness. So being well is that self-care. Am I doing my self-care? Am I sleeping, eating, drinking enough water, drinking less alcohol, for example? Am I in therapy? Am I exercising? All the things of self-care. And so that's encompassed by wellness for me. Other people have different types of values. And some could be, as David is saying, around acting with integrity. And I think values is something that not many of us have done. We haven't done the work in values unless you've been in a professional development day, or you might have done a bit of behavioral assessments on who you are as a person and how you click within a team. But most of us haven't done values work before. And so values is a great way to find a compass and live more mindfully too. The next one is Ash. And Ash, congratulations on being on the Mindful Men podcast. Welcome to the show. His definition is around being present in everything. Being here and now, even when it gets dark, tough, and uncomfortable. It's something that I struggle with, but want to be more mindful in my life. That's a great definition there by Ash. And it highlights both vulnerability, but also conscious awareness as well. And being present is where my mindfulness journey really started to take hold. When I burnt out in 2020, I was finding that I wasn't present. I wasn't here. I was in the dark. I didn't know how to get out. My brain was consumed with thinking about yesterday or tomorrow, and it wasn't really here and now. And so my kids might have been talking to me, and they might be jumping up and down saying, "Dad, Dad, Dad." But I wasn't present. I wasn't paying attention. I didn't even know that they were doing it. And so I found different ways to be present, and that's using my 5 senses. And I used to go on these mindfulness walks where I tune into nature and help really ground myself. And now I can also do it with a bit of breath work as well, tuning into my breath. But more broadly, and onto Ash's definition, is being present allows us to feel, it allows us to heal, to problem solve, and just simply be. If you sit in a garden for long enough, for example, without distractions, and just watch, imagine what you can see. All of a sudden, you can see an insect jumping on the grass, or a bee or a butterfly landing on a flower. Or you can watch the wind as it moves the tree in your backyard or the bushes in your backyard. Or if you've got a swimming pool, the ripples of the wave from the wind dancing across the top of the water. Often we're so busy to sit and reflect and see that type of stuff, but mindfulness is about being present in that moment. And also recognizing that if it is dark and you don't know how to get out, and it's tough and it's uncomfortable, as Ash says, it's recognizing that that will pass, being confident that that will pass. And yes, we do struggle with it. And Ash says that he struggles with it as well. But the more we practice it, the more we can get better at it. And then that darkness, it eventually lightens up. The fog disappears and we can see clearer. The next one is from another member of the Facebook community group, Simon. And welcome, Simon, to the Mindful Men podcast. Great to have you here, even though I am also Simon and it sounds like I'm talking to myself or saying my own things. But no, this is from Simon in the Facebook community group. And Simon says that his definition of what it means to be a mindful man is to embrace vulnerability, to engage in self-care for yourself so you can be the best version of you possible for others that you love around you. He mentions talking a lot and listening a lot and breaking through existing biases, stereotypes, and generalizations around men's health, and the intricately woven tapestry that is our lives with the ones that we love and hold close. That's a big definition. And Simon, thank you so much for putting it into the Mindful Men community. And you touch on a couple aspects that I wanted to highlight. One is around vulnerability. And a lot of guys don't really like the word vulnerability, but I love it. As a social worker, I love Brene Brown's work on vulnerability, but also breaking stereotypes. And I talk about this a lot in the podcast that I'm a guest on, breaking stereotypes about what it means to be a man in 2020. So on those two things, how many of us grew up in an age where there was pressure about what it means to be a boy or a man? I did. How many of us have carried that through into adulthood? I have. How many of us are now applying that same notion of what it means to be a man to our sons? First of all, this is accepting that maybe the things that we have grown up believing about ourselves aren't necessarily fit for purpose anymore. Yes, they may have been fit for purpose decades ago, but not so much these days. The second aspect of that is, what are we going to do about it? So what if we broke free of these outdated notions of masculinity and we said, you know what, that it's okay to speak and that it's not weak to speak. It's okay to be not okay. What if we recognize that we're not necessarily the breadwinners in our family and our partners' careers also matter? What if we recognize that we're equal in the family, for example? Simon talks about the woven tapestry that is our lives with the ones we love and hold close to us. So it's not just about us as well. Vulnerability is opening ourselves up to the world. And so once we do this and say, hey, maybe I'm feeling lonely, or maybe I'm struggling with my mental health, or whatever it is, we can start to break down these stereotypes that guys have to have it all sorted out and they can't talk about stuff and they can't feel these emotions. And this is hard for men. I get it, because it's so ingrained in us, both at a personal level, but at a society level as well. But mindfulness can help guide us. Is it coming back to our values like we talked about earlier, and having values that may be around vulnerability or authenticity, knowing that it's okay to be your full true self. It doesn't matter what other people think. It only matters how we, behave and display that authenticity as well. And the final one I'll highlight is from Shane. Shane, thanks so much for sharing in the Mindful Men community group. Welcome to the podcast. Congrats for getting your name mentioned. And what Shane says is that what it means to be a mindful man is slowing down, doing things for an actual purpose, and trying to always think before I act or speak, always remembering that you don't know what anyone else is going through. Really powerful one here. And Shane touches on being mindful of others and self, and we've talked a bit about that in the other definitions too, but also thinking before acting. This is important because when we're on autopilot, we're doing, we're not thinking, or we're not feeling. I talked about autopilot before, and by consciously living, turning off the autopilot, turning on conscious living, we start to be mindful about our position in the world and how we're interacting with the world. We're being mindful about that. And it's really important here because when we start to pause and reflect and be considerate of others, we all of a sudden take the spotlight off of ourselves and onto them. And that gives them a chance to shine as well. Another aspect of this, and I posted recently in the Mindful Men community page about emotional responses to situations, and particularly anger. Now, anger in itself is a healthy, normal emotion, but it can be hurtful if we use it in certain ways. I've done podcast episodes around addiction, and anger sometimes is fueling the addiction, or maybe ending men's violence against women and children, so the family and domestic violence aspects of it as well. Anger could present and result in things like suicide. If we're not able to tune into those feelings and emotions with openness, with kindness, that self-compassion stuff that I was talking about earlier from Dr. Russ Harris, we can blow up like a volcano. But mindfulness helps us to regain the calm, whether it's through journaling, meditation, exercise, values, or therapy. We sharpen our ability to cope with things like anger or other emotions as well. and we can reduce the impact that anger could have on our relationships. Another aspect of Shane's thing is slowing down. We don't have to go at life at a million miles an hour. We can stop, we can sit in that garden and wait for a butterfly to appear. So that's it for today's episode. But one last thing is, if you want to be part of this Mindful Men community, a community of men being mindful and developing their mindfulness tools, join the Mindful Men Facebook community group. It's the first time I've got into the group space, and eventually there'll be some in-person stuff as well, maybe some online Zoom stuff. But initially it's just the Facebook group. So connect in there, share some content, like and comment on the stuff that I'm putting up there regularly, and start to develop this idea of what it means to be a mindful man and break free from the autopilot and start living consciously.